Welcome back to the Investor Professor podcast. This is Dr. Ryan Peckham, and this is episode 42. On today's episode, we talk about poison pills. We got Twitter, we got Elon Musk, we got all the ingredients for a good old-fashioned corporate fight. So let's get into it. Get your mind right. Let's get to work. Okay, well, welcome back to the show, everybody. When I first started this podcast, one of my buddies goes, man, well, what are you going to talk about, once you get 25 episodes in? And I go, I don't know, there'll be something. And that something has turned out to be Elon Musk. So thank you, Elon, for always, providing some kind of fodder to discuss. And so this Elon Musk, grabbing shares of Twitter. This week, he just decides basically, hey, I just want to buy the whole company. And so when you start looking at that, as we'll get into, it's a pretty amazing day when the richest man in the world can just say, hey, I liked the thought of owning some shares of you, and I like the thought of being on your board, but better than that is just me, just buying the whole company. So I think that's what I want to do. So when you look at Twitter as a company, just to give you some background knowledge here, and that's what today's going to be about. I'm going to give you the whole thing. So, gather around, kiddies. Let's have a little history lesson. Twitter became public or went public in September of 2013. And so when you look at Twitter going public in 2013, the stock went public at around $43, and it's currently at like 46 or so. From 2013 to today, it's only up 10%. So when you go back to that date in 2013, Twitter's only up around 10%. And when you look at Facebook, it's up 350%. Google's up 398%. Apple's up, what would that be? 789%. And Amazon's up 766%. So it definitely has not been an outperformer since it became public. I mean, the highest it's been since it became public would have been, December 2021, February 2021. It hit $77. And then the lowest it's been is around 16 back in around 2016. So there's been some up down, but overall, if you bought Twitter right when it came out to today, you haven't made much money at all. And so there's been rumblings for a couple of years that Elon Musk has wanted to start his own social network platform. And then I guess, he starts thinking about it and goes, well, geez, I'm on Twitter. The company isn't worth that much. Maybe I could just buy them. They have the infrastructure in place, and I'll just be able to make some changes. Because when you look at it today, the market cap, right, the total value of Twitter, the market cap today is $34 billion. And Elon Musk's net worth is estimated at $260 billion. Now, you have to understand, it's not like that's cash in a bank account. I mean, most of that, 80% of it is locked up in Tesla shares. So this starts to have an impact on them. And then some of his net worth is in SpaceX, which is a private company. And that's kind of his idea here is he would acquire Twitter, and he would basically take the company private for a while, make a lot of changes, and then maybe at some point bring them back to the public markets or keep them private. Who knows? Right. So last week when he was talking about getting on the board of directors, when that comes with a caveat. So if he joins the board, he can't have more than 14.9% of the shares. And so we'll discuss why that's important here in a little bit. So he decided this past week, no, I don't want to be on the board. And then he makes a public offer on Thursday night, Friday morning, I don't remember which one, says, I'll buy you for $54.20. Hiding in that, throwing in his 420 joke for good measure, as he usually does. And so the Twitter board basically comes back and they said, well, they turn it down and say, we're going to adopt a poison pill strategy. So let's discuss what the poison pill strategy is. So the poison pill strategy, the real name for it is a shareholder rights plan, but poison pill just sounds a lot better and it definitely gets the media's attention. Shareholder right plan doesn't really have the same kind of, ring to it. So this was developed by an attorney named Martin Lipton, who developed this in 1982 when T. Boone Pickens, the old oil baron, was trying to take over a company called General American Oil. And basically, you try to flood the market with new stock, which is not available to the person or entity trying to take over the company. So basically, you're saying, okay, we're going to issue new shares to all the shareholders, but the person trying to take us over doesn't get to participate in that. And we're also going to offer them at a discount. So Twitter is basically saying if Elon Musk gets above 15% ownership, the poison pill would kick in. Now, they haven't said what the discount will be or how many shares they'll offer the current shareholders, but it's usually, most of them, it's 1-to-1 normally. And so this, what ends up happening is you dilute the person who's trying to take you over. And I'll kind of share some math with you here in a little bit that kind of shows illustrate how this works. But you're basically trying to make it unenticing for the person to eventually take you over by doing this. Now, the 15% that the Twitter board set is an interesting number because, like I just said, that if he wanted to be on the board, he could have 14.9% of the shares. So, it's basically saying we don't want you to take us over, but we're still not opposed to you being on our board and having an impact. We just don't want you to own the entire company and be able to do whatever you want. So it's interesting to me because they are basically leaving the door open for him to be on the board and to make some changes if he wants. They just don't want him to own the entire company. So we'll get to see what he does. But of course, with it being Elon Musk, he could probably, he's probably already thought about, okay, I'm going to buy 14.99% shares, of the company and leave myself like one share before going over the limit or whatever he would want to do. And so, it's just an interesting strategy, but it's been a very effective strategy. And this was developed, I told you, 1982. And so when you think about, the companies that have used this to kind of protect themselves, it has been pretty effective. And so when you look back like the 80s, when you look at that decade of the stock market and you think about movies made back then, like the movie Wall Street with Gordon Gekko, they were called corporate raiders. They would go into a company, they would do what's called a hostile takeover. They would buy up all the shares. They'd come in, they'd say, hey, I own 51% of the company. They'd appoint themselves to the board. They would then sell off pieces of the company because they thought the pieces were worth more than the entire company. And so that's kind of where that comes from. And so this was developed for them to be able to protect themselves. And so it's just something that hasn't been used in a long time, but it's definitely something that a company can do to try to prevent somebody from taking them over. One of the other strategies a company can do is to take on a lot of debt where, they become less profitable and they don't look as, they don't look as good of an investment. But when you look at, the math of this, and doing math in public is always, it's always nerve-wracking to do math in public. But I want to just kind of walk you through maybe an easy exercise to see how this would work. So Twitter has a lot more shares than I'm going to use here. But just for your listening purposes, let's say that Twitter has 10,000 shares of stock. Okay. And they're saying basically, Elon, you can't own more than 15%, right? So that 15% of 10,000 would be 1,500 shares. Okay. So if he were to go over that 1,500 shares, that's when the poison pill provision or the shareholders' right provision would come into play. And so what they could say is okay, once that happens, we're going to allow everybody besides Elon Musk to buy one extra share of stock. For every share you own, you can buy one more share at a discounted price. And the discounted price can be whatever they set it at. Let's say maybe they do it at 50% off. And so, there's going to be, if there's 10,000 shares and he owns 1,500, that means there's going to be 8,500 shares left. So if they allow all those people to buy one more additional share, well, that 8,500 would then become 17,000 if everybody exercised that, correct? So you'd have 8,500 plus 8,500, and which would be 17,000. And then you'll have Elon's 1,500 shares on top of that, right? So the total shares in the company would then be 18,500 because he doesn't get to participate. Well, his 15% is now going to drop because now he's still going to own the same amount of shares, 1,500, but the total share count is now 18,500. So his percentage goes from 15% to 8.1, if you're following me. So it becomes harder for him to sit there and try to accumulate shares. And it also dilutes the stock, drops the value of the stock. And so then he loses a lot of money because he goes from 15% to 8%. And the value of the stock drops as well because they flooded the market with all these new shares and diluted the shares. So, it makes it it makes it not dangerous, but it just makes it to where, man, does he really want to do this? Because he's going to cost himself a lot of money. So this will be very interesting to see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks because, Elon is a very polarizing figure and there might be, a lot of Twitter shareholders that think that the company would run better if he were in charge. And so you could have, retail investors decide to pick Elon versus the board, and that could be a big problem for the stock, for the board, for other shareholders. It's just going to be interesting to see how this plays out because it has gotten so much attention, especially this weekend, because of who he is and how outspoken he is. One of the things that's kind of interesting is Kohl's, the retailer, Kohl's, the clothing store. They actually put together a poison pill or shareholder rights plan in effect in February, and nobody's talked about it. Like it's got no news. There's nobody talking about it. But Kohl's did this as well to try to prevent somebody from taking them over, and so it kind of comes down to it's just a much different conversation. When you think about somebody taking over a business or one company acquiring another company, one of the things that is that loses, I don't know, it's just not talked about a lot is the cultures, right? And how, one business might want to acquire another business and it might make sense on paper, but do their cultures get along? If you've done any kind of mergers and acquisition experience, or if you have any of that in your future, depending on what business you're in. I mean, I dealt with this with banking for a little bit and doing some acquisitions. I mean, the hardest part, 100%, the hardest part of doing this is the people piece of it, because people are creatures of habit. They want to do things the way they want to do them. And if somebody doesn't want to work for you, there's nothing you can do to get them to want to work for you. And so, just because you acquire a business or you take something over, it doesn't mean that the people are going to work hard for you or they're going to do anything. I mean, a lot of times, if they really don't want to do it, they'll start trying to sabotage you from the inside, right? So, if Elon Musk were to take Twitter over and they don't want it, then all of a sudden people aren't working as hard. They're not doing the things that they need to be doing. It just becomes a nightmare. And so trying to take somebody over that doesn't want to be taken over is just historically has not been a good idea for a company, or especially for the stock of that company. It just normally does not work out very well. And so now if Elon Musk made an offer to buy the company that the company wanted, the board can vote not to have this poison pill go into effect. Like they can actually remove it. And, they don't have to put it into effect, but they can. And so it basically gives them the option, which is kind of what they set in place. And so again, it'll just be interesting to see, how this plays out over the next couple of weeks and what Elon Musk's next move is going to be based on, what he wants to do, because it also, for him to be able to raise this money, it's starting to impact Tesla stock, right? So if I pull up Tesla and we look here, I mean, just yesterday, Thursday, I'm being recording this on Saturday, but yesterday was Good Friday, so the market was closed. But Tesla was down $37 to $985 on that announcement, because, if he were to try to buy them with Tesla shares or whatever, if he sold them, obviously he's Tesla's largest shareholder. He'd have to sell those, which would bring the price down of Tesla to buy. But he talked about getting financing. So the disaster here for Twitter, and if you're a shareholder for Twitter, the disaster would be Elon Musk says, fine, I don't want to own these shares anymore. And if he just started dumping all those shares of Twitter that he just bought, because he owns 9.2%, I believe that's right, 9.2% of the entire company. So if he just started offloading those this next week, Twitter and Twitter's shareholders would definitely feel that, because over the last year, they were at $39. Then they ramped up to $50 when it became public that Elon was buying all those shares, and it's currently at $45. So if he decided to dump all those shares, it would definitely push the price of Twitter down. So again, man, there's always something to talk about. And these poison pill plans, they're always very public. Like the companies always want them to be well known. They want, they put it out there. They want it to be well known so that people do know about it. It's not something they're trying to hide behind. But it does, it's just something that we haven't seen in a long time, especially something this public, because once companies started adapting it, you started having, a lot of people who wanted to take over a business. They started being much nicer about it. It's funny. I told you in the 80s they were called corporate raiders. Now there's a much nicer term. I think they call themselves like activist investors, right? So you see like the Carl Icahns and, hey, we're here to help you. And, you kind of, if you get a reputation of buying a company and then basically, getting rid of people and tearing it apart from the inside, nobody wants to do business with you. And so it shows you, when you look at somebody like Warren Buffett, who has taken over businesses, but he doesn't really want to run them. He keeps the management in place. He keeps his shares. He never sells them. It's a completely different model. And so, it just goes back that, if you're trying to take somebody over that doesn't want to be taken over, it causes a lot of headaches. And so for that reason, most of them over the years like this, the poison pill has been extremely effective in preventing people from trying to take over businesses, because it just becomes too complicated, too drawn out. You're losing money. It's just not a good situation if you're trying to acquire somebody. And so it's much easier if you come up with a plan, or you negotiate something that everybody is kind of behind, so that everybody wins and there's not just one winner. So I hope this helps you understand that a little bit better. Now you can go talk to all your friends, tell them the history of it. Oh yeah, this attorney in Texas came up with this idea when T. Boone Pickens tried to take over a company, and you're just kind of be the expert on it. It's almost like recording Jeopardy and then bringing your friends over and hitting play and answering all the questions right. And they're like, whoa, how'd you do that? Wow, amazing. So hope it helps you. Hope you're working on your goals, not mistaking activity for achievement. I hope you have a great week. Look forward to seeing you again next week. I think we're going to have an interview for next week's show, so I'm excited about that. But have a great week, everybody. I'll see you next time.